下面我请以色列代表发言。
Mr. President, from Brussels to Istanbul and from Ivory Coast to Tel Aviv, the world is facing an unprecedented surge of terrorism and violent extremism. Radical extremist groups such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab have declared war on our societies. Terror is a common enemy of humanity and requires a unified effort to fight it. The state of Israel, my state, stands shoulder to shoulder with the international community in this global effort. Unfortunately, the reality of terror is one the people of Israel have known for decades, and it continues still today. From the Fadayin attacks of the 50s to airplane hijacking in the 70s and suicide bombing in the 90s, Israel has faced wave after wave of terrorist violence. In the last 6 months alone, we have endured over 300 attacks. That means 2 terror attacks a day, every day, for half a year. 34 people have been killed and hundreds have been injured. In order to defeat this terror, we must have moral clarity. The decision to pick up a knife or put on a suicide vest is not about human nature. There is nothing natural about repeatedly stabbing an innocent woman in front of her home or shooting a young husband and wife in front of their children. Terrorism must never be excused or justified. It must be fought. And there can be no double standards in this fight. Since the beginning of this wave of terror, this Security Council has not condemned a single terror attack against Israel, not even one. The lives of Israelis killed in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv are no less precious than Europeans murdered in Paris and Brussels. The attacks against Israel must be condemned by this Council. Terror is terror is terror. Mr. President, in order to fight terror effectively, this Council must speak out against all terrorist groups without distinction. Hezbollah, a terrorist proxy of Iran, openly threatens to launch attacks against Israeli civilians. Just recently, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, warned of an attack on the ammonia storage tanks in the Israeli city of Haifa. He described it, and I quote, exactly the same as nuclear bomb. Let me remind you all that Hezbollah has over 100,000 rockets and long-range missiles that can target any place in Israel. They have transformed the villages of southern Lebanon into terror outposts, placing rocket launchers next to schools, next to UN facilities, and storing missiles in living rooms. The Secretary General only recently has warned that Hezbollah is ready and willing to use these weapons. He has condemned Hezbollah's alarming rhetoric. He emphasized the very grave consequences this military buildup, not just for us, not just for Israel, but for the entire region. Even the Gulf states and the Arab League have called Hezbollah a terrorist organization. So why the Security Council refuse to call this terror organization by its proper name? If it makes threats like a terror organization, if it stockpiles weapons like a terror organization, if it shows disregard for human life like a terror organization, then what is it? Hezbollah is a terror organization. It is preparing for another round of violence. This Council must take action now. Resolution 1701 must be enforced. Hezbollah must be disarmed. Mr. President, the major source of violent extremism in our region is Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Iran sponsors terror groups throughout the region, including the deadly activities of Hezbollah in Syria. Recently, Iran conducted tests of ballistic missiles. These missiles are designed to carry the nuclear warheads they have promised not to build. Written in Hebrew on the side of these missiles were the words, and I quote, "Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth." Such a threat by one member state of the United Nations against another member state is outrageous and unacceptable. The voice of this Council must be heard. Iran must be condemned. While Iran supports Hezbollah in the north, it sponsors and supplies Hamas in the south. Hamas, an internationally designated terrorist organization, also employs the cynical terror tactic of using the civilian infrastructure for terror operations. And they have never stopped working to achieve their goal, the destruction of the State of Israel. Ever since the end of the last conflict, Hamas has worked to rebuild its arsenal of rockets and reconstruct its network of terror tunnels. When groups like Hamas and Hezbollah are more interested in warfare with Israel than in the welfare of their own people, it is a recipe for disaster. This Council must denounce these terror organizations by name. Mr. President, because of the ongoing need to protect our people, Israel has developed techniques, technologies, and tools for counter-terrorism, unmatched by any other country. We are committed to share this knowledge and expertise through bilateral collaboration and constructive engagement here at the UN. As I said at the beginning, Israel stands firmly with the family of nations in the fight against terror. We expect that the international community and this Council will stand with Israel in our own fight against terror. If we stand united, we can defeat global terrorism and stop those who seek to undermine our way of life. Thank you.
我感谢以色列代表的发言。下面我请欧洲联盟驻联合国